America is in decline, which is upsetting. You know, I'm sure the last couple of generations at the end of the Ottoman Empire were upset too. It's just it's an upsetting experience to see your culture go from top of the heap to what looks like, you know, real secondary status, and so it's on our minds, and it's undeniable that some Americans are coping with this sort of darkening sky over the North American continent by insisting that it's not happening, insisting that you know, it's happening because we've been too generous to lazy and terrible people. It's happening, but let's just stay happy anyway. And that is the atmosphere in which an American novelist writes now. And again, I keep getting back to this. Always happy endings. I am an optimist, but I live in a country that is battling despair, and you know, that's, you write about your times. Any narrative is about time passing. I think it's the difference, the only meaningful difference between prose and poetry. A poem doesn't have to account for the linear passage of time, and the story really does. And the passage of time suggests birth and mortality, and there you are. I've always been aware of the fact that I could give any novel to anybody and say, I hope you like this book. It's about the passage of time. And in some books more than others, but yeah, the passage of time suggests mortality. And you know, this may have something to do with myself as an American writer. Americans, all the rumors are true. Americans have I think a terrible relationship to mortality. No. Stay happy. Here's your pill, your TV show starts in 5 minutes. I'm not opposed to happiness, in moderation. But you know what I'm saying? I feel like I come from a culture that will not think or talk about where it's headed, which can produce a certain dread, you know, the sense of mortality as the monster outside the door. And I don't really think of it that way. So I may, as an American writer, I may write more about mortality than I might if I were, say, a French writer. All of my novels have had happy endings. This novel, we don't want to give it away, this novel ends on a slightly ambivalent note, but certainly not with death or destruction. It ends with life going on, and all my novels have. Whether it's an android cowboy riding into the sunset, whether it's Clarissa Dalloway sort of taking Mrs. Brown in. So essentially, I'm sentimental. I like happy endings, but I'm not that sentimental. And I think you can only trust a happy ending that has survived the worst that can happen to people. Otherwise, it's just kitsch. Mediapart. It is still alarming to publish a novel. I think it should be alarming to publish a novel. I think if you do not feel with each novel like maybe this one is a disaster. If you don't feel that way, I think maybe you're not striving enough. You're not reaching far enough. I think the big surprise about being a novelist for a number of years is you don't feel like an expert. You don't feel confident. You don't feel like whoa, I really know what I'm doing. But you also learn that if you felt that way, it would be a terrible thing. If you ever find yourself sitting in your room at your computer, I work on a computer thing, oh, the genius does it again, you're in trouble. You're becoming the sort of hack. So, yeah, I am at this point reconciled to the fact that I will always feel, as long as I write novels, a little bit like I don't know what I'm doing, and that that's uncomfortable, but right. You risk so much as a writer, and you are always going to please some people and not please others. Yeah. I mean, I am very much, well, the sort of idiot child of Flaubert and Virginia Woolf and James Joyce and all of those people who felt most drawn to finding the drama in outwardly ordinary lives. You know, it's a bourgeois housewife. It's a day in the life of Clarissa Dalloway, an unextraordinary woman in England. It's the day in the life of Leopold Bloom, who just walks around Dublin, you know, buys soap for his wife. That's just where my attention goes. I had a couple of questions going in, or a question about writing a novel about people this privileged, because we can't help but notice that the most fortunate 1% of the population seems to make up about 50% of the population of novels. And I thought, well, you know, this story doesn't work any other way. And the advice is that the new novel is not about rich people and lofts in Soho. I certainly wanted to acknowledge Thomas Mann and Death in Venice, and Thomas Mann was a greater writer than I will ever be. But this book is not based on the Magic Mountain. I sort of wanted to acknowledge the Grand Master, Thomas Mann, with the understanding that I think both Mann and I were writing stories about something far more ancient than Thomas Mann or me, where we were writing each in our own way. And we both happened to choose older men and younger men. We're writing about a human urge for something fresh and new and promising and probably unattainable. It's the figures on Greek urns. It's that luscious pink white body, all, you know, fading in a fresco 2,000 years old. I think fiction remains the best way to explore a character's deepest feelings, hidden thoughts, secrets, doubts, lusts, because in no medium other than fiction can you go that deeply into a character. Movies can't do it, TV can't do it. I love movies and TV, but they do something else. And even biography has its limits. There are limits to what an actual living person can tell you. There are limits to what you can understand. With an invented character, there are no limits. Mm-hmm. You can go all the way inside and tickle their backbones. For one thing, you want to keep changing it. You don't want to sort of settle into a way of writing novels. You want every novel to feel new to you. And so, yeah, on one level, I kind of felt like I have tried to write symphonies. What about a sonata? Every bit is challenging, but on a different scale. And also, the first question you ask of any novel before you write it is, what's the best way to tell this particular story? I think it would be a terrible mistake to have started, well, say the Hours or Specimen Days, thinking this is going to be enormously complex, this is going to be structurally unorthodox, this is going to move around in time and space. Then you have some ambition that you're imposing on the story, whereas I think the story should discover its own ambitions. And I started out The Hours, my most famous one to date, was going to be a simple retelling of the story of Mrs. Dalloway, and that didn't seem like enough, and so we added another story and another story. This one felt like it wanted to be simple and linear and fairly sober. And I'm working on another one that's very different. That's got 100 characters and a lot of different things going on.
Mediapart.
One of the questions that Peter Harris is asking about art, about contemporary art, is what, if anything, does art owe to the people who see it? For centuries, art was meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be, if I use the word consoling, I don't mean like, pat on the back consoling, but it was meant to make you feel like you are part of something bigger, a world, a cosmos. That's Giotto and Michelangelo and Rothko. And lately, not so much. The relationship between the artist and the viewer is very different now. Art tends to be ironic and off-putting, and beauty is equated with sentimentality. Earnestness is considered embarrassing, and that scene. It's a scene in which this woman who's led a good and honorable life has breast cancer, and she will not live too much longer. And it was one of the first scenes I thought of when I was thinking about the novel. I thought of this woman toward the end of her life looking straight on into this particular Damien Hirst piece, which is a 13-foot dead shark in a tank of formaldehyde. And what Damien Hirst, I think, is saying to this woman with a dead shark is, I have nothing to offer you. I have nothing for you. Bitch, live or die. I don't care. I don't mean by that scene to say that Damien Hirst's shark is just nonsense. These are real questions that I don't have real cogent answers to, because in fact, the dead shark, I don't know if you've ever seen it, in this tank of blue formaldehyde is quite beautiful in its way. It's not without beauty. It is pretty heartless. And yeah, I think, well, to me, the really interesting questions are the ones that don't have real answers. And I have questions about the Damien Hirst shark, but I don't have real answers. Any artist who figures as an actual character in the novel is invented. I wasn't going to try to imagine Bruce Nauman and make him a character. So the artists who are referenced are all actual living or no longer living artists, and the artists who actually arrive in person are invented artists. And that, it's funny, people have a way sometimes of saying, oh, I remember people saying it about the last third of Specimen Days is science fiction. Oh, you must have had a lot of fun writing that. Well, no, actually it's not. Thank you for thinking, but it's not fun. It's really difficult. That was fun. It was fun to invent art and the artists who produce it. See, novelists do have a little bit of fun some of the time. The art business is very much a business, and at this point, you can make $1 billion selling art. It's not just a little business; it's a big business. And I did a lot of research. I mean, I already knew a fair amount because I have friends in the arts, but I worked in a gallery for a week. I went to parties with a freelance art dealer, and when the draft of the novel was finished, I showed it to these guys. I showed it to art dealers, and they, does this seem right? Because you want to check, and they all said yes. Though it errs on the side of charitable. The actual world of buying and selling art is more cynical and awful than much of what you depict. I mean, yours is sufficiently cynical and awful. It doesn't feel sugar-coated, but it's even worse. And it's true. I've seen that. If there is a hot young artist out there, sort of cynically producing product for the marketplace, I haven't met that person. It's not. I don't think it's about young artists sitting in their studio going, I'm going to foist this one off on the American public. It's more complicated than that. It's the factor is much more prevalent on the business side. The dealers who, well, not only wheel and deal and feel about art pretty much the way other people feel about barrels of oil. They also home in on certain young artists who they think they can sell. So the artist in this studio in the Bronx happens to be producing something that a dealer thinks, oh, I can sell this. Next door, in the studio next door, is another artist of the same age, similar gifts, doing something that the dealer doesn't feel is sellable. To me, that line from Rilke, which is, beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror. I don't think, to me, it doesn't mean literally terror. I think he's talking about a beauty that is very different from prettiness. It's not the bowl of tulips, and we love a bowl of tulips. It's the alien angel with 10 eyes and a sword made of silver liquid light. It's the kind of beauty that changes you in some way. You've lived in a village all your life. The only music you've heard is folk songs played in the accordion. Someone takes you to hear a Bach sonata for the first time. Like that. The kind of sudden exposure to beauty that changes the world for you. Most of the books I love, in some way or another, deal with a character's often fatal confrontation with beauty, whatever that means to the character. I mean, Emma Bovary, however deluded she is, has this idea of romance and candles in a ballroom. I mean, Jay Gatsby in Fitzgerald the Great Gatsby stands on the end of the dock and looks at the green light of Daisy Buchanan's house across the bay. I mean, I feel like if you took away the sort of hopeless yearning for unattainable beauty, we lose about half of literature. It has long been my experience that for many of us, sexuality resides outside the realm of category. I just deeply believe that each of us has his or her own sexual geography that doesn't precisely match that of anybody else. And I'm not. There's been a popular question. So do you think that all men are at least a little bit gay? I do not. I do not. I mean, I don't know all men, and I'm sure I do believe there are men out there who have no homosexual inclinations whatsoever. But I do think whether you are entirely heterosexual or entirely homosexual or somewhere in between, our sexuality is personal. As personal as our fingerprints. And I don't feel like that has been talked about enough in our literature. I feel like well, for one thing, until about 100 years ago, you couldn't really write about sex at all. And sometimes I feel like writers are still oversimplifying it. That we just sort of talk about sex as sex, and in fact everybody's sex is different. And I think too, For some of us, sexuality it's certainly simply desire, a pure chemical component that I never deny, but it's about memory. It's about having been 4 years old, about having been 14 years old. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm fascinated by the mutability of sexuality. And Peter is essentially heterosexual. He has a little wiggle room, but I felt like this is only going to be interesting to me if it was not a closeted gay guy coming out at a certain point in his life, but a man who has always been attracted to women, who finds himself for the first time attracted to this boy, not boys in general, but this boy. So it takes on, one hopes, a certain aspect of a doomed romance. If it was somebody the other day said, well, why didn't you just make Missy a girl? And I said, well, but then they could have an affair. Then it would really be a story about will they or won't they. This is impossible from the beginning, which makes Peter's desire for it more compelling to me. I don't want to just complain about America here today. There's lots. America has many charms and virtues. But a funny relationship to mortality, and I think often a funny relationship to, I don't know what to call it exactly, art. Yeah, there's been a certain amount, oh, all right, Mr. Smarty Pants, go ahead and make these literary allusions. Like, well, fuck you, who cares? I'm not going to dumb the books down.